So when we look at the Indian history, the first dynasty of India, uh, the great dynasty of the Mauryas, the Mauryan dynasty, if you see, there was no state religion as such. Chanakya was a Brahmin, but then nobody knows the caste of Chandragupta. And Chandragupta ultimately converted into a Jain, came down to the south and performed Sallekana Vrata and died here. So his grandson, Ashoka the Great, namely the first ruler to give up war after victory, was another great personality. The entire world looks up to him. And here, one of the most important credentials of Ashoka was he treated people of all religions equally. And as a testimony to that, in Rock Addict 12, you come across his writings wherein he speaks of religious tolerance, and he requests people of all faith to see to it that everybody treats the other person on par equally without any distinction of caste, creed, or color. And apart from that, when Ashoka started funding the Buddhists, he also gave the same sort of state funding to the Brahmins also equally. And not just the Buddhists and the Brahmins received state funding, even the Ajivikas or the so called atheists, they were also funded for construction of their dwellings. So, in that way, we have great history of more than 2,300 years where people have lived harmoniously in this country. But such a great tradition has now been put to question, especially over the last couple of hundred years. And for anything and everything, now we see that the Mughal dynasty is always on the firing line. Everybody wants to fire them and say that all the problems in India are because of the Mughals. So, coming to the present day context, the government today is extremely happy to speak about the term Vishwaguru. They want India to be the Vishwaguru. So, when we really speak of Vishwaguru, can we be antagonizing one particular community, members of one particular community? Is a question mark that each one of us listening here needs to answer. It is here that we need to really question the role of the government, whether the government is there to govern, make state policies, as well as give good governance and work towards development, or are we to keep mum when lynching goes on? Because mob lynching is something that has been going on over the past few years in the name of religion. Is the state equipped to stop this? What are we really doing about this? Then we also speak of Garvapsi. Why do you speak of Garvapsi? I don't really understand, because those who came, when we look at human history as such, man was a hunter basically. We created religion for our own safety, creating our own safety nets. So, in that way, the first people who converted, nobody knows. I don't know what was the first religion of my ancestors. The same with each one of us present here. So, in that context, we always love to fire at the Mughals, especially the present regime. But then we conveniently forget that Babur had instructed, the first Mughal ruler, Babur had instructed his son Humayun to safeguard all the people of India, irrespective of whatever caste, creed, religion, race they belong to. Then comes his grandson, Akbar the Great. Akbar, again, we today don't speak of Din Ilahi. Din Ilahi comprised of all the a good number of elements from all the major religions of India and abroad, including Zoroastrianism as well as Christianity. So it is here that he also held councils and religious debates in the form of Ibadat Khana. So we conveniently don't tend to harp upon these things and speak upon these things. So in that way, it is for us today as scholars, as researchers, as people who educate the younger generations to just make the students open their minds and really tell them as to who is the real enemy. Is it the electoral politics which we are all engulfed into? Is it the dirty politicians who take the mantle onto themselves to create a divide amongst the people? Or is there something else to this? So, in that way, we have two eminent panelists to speak, both of them good friends of mine, and then both of them people who really uphold secular values, and people who have been very good teachers, excellent orators, as well as people who always stand for upholding the rights of the ordinary people in the society, and people who are great nationalists. So, in that way, first I would invite Professor Ravi Richard to make his remarks, and after that, I would invite Dr. Albert Joseph Smith to speak. Professor Ravi, you can start.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. I think you've given a very interesting perspective about the background and history of secularism in India, and especially recalling the names of both Ashoka the Great and uh, Emperor Akbar. I think India has always had a composite culture right from ancient times, where it's blended different ideas, thoughts, practices, cultures has all been integrated, and we have been very tolerant towards each other and for a very long time. But the term secularism, I think also we need to know that it's a more a modern term, and I think its roots maybe or its application must have been the last century or so. That's my understanding of the word secularism, where it is implied that the state doesn't patronize or interfere with the functioning of religions, and it keeps a neutral stance. So that's my understanding of secularism. And the theme of the conference is the challenges to secularism in the 21st century. So the issue today is today this composite culture is at threat. That is because of different kind of incidents which have happened in the past. One is because of the way the democracy has been, what do you say, turning out to be because of different kind of alignments, stands taken by different political parties. And today we find the political scenario posing a threat to this composite culture, which we interpret and understand as secularism. Now, the reason for this to happen is because of the post-Nehruvian period. That's from the 1980s onwards. That's my observation. There have been instances in the past, even during the British days, there have been communal discord and issues. And at the time of the freedom movement, we had a major fiasco of this communalism going to unpleasant and very drastic levels. But from the 1950s to the 1970s or late 70s, things were all right because of a great prime minister like Jawaharlal Nehru. I think he emphasized on scientific temper, secularism, and he ensured that communalism would never find its way through. It was in the 1980s we started finding this getting distorted, and especially with the intervention of the VHP, which started raising this issue of Babri Masjid, and then the rule of the Congress also patronizing a minority community, especially trying to reverse the verdict of the Supreme Court in the Shah Banu's case by bringing a new legislation, started sending messages that the state was going overboard and trying to patronize certain minority communities. And that, I think, became a trigger for communal elements in this country, especially whom we perceive today as a threat to secularism. That was the roots when the entire problem or the threat to secularism started in India in the way back in the 80s, first with the Babri Masjid issue, the Shah Banu's case, and also the anti-Sikh riots which happened in 1984 after Indira Gandhi's death, where two communities were at loggerheads, the Sikhs and the Hindus. So this is what I see as very impeding and grave threats which we see continuing and escalating uh, today in today's context. And also the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992 with the Rath Yatra by Advani set the tone for a very grave danger which was kind of unfolding in India. So post that, I think we know that the entire political situation started changing. The Sangh Parivar and its political parties all started getting into prominence. The BJP came to power, and it's one of the parties which promotes that ideology of having Hindutva, and that's their stand. And today we have a lot of issues which have cropped up, and some of the issues which I feel are threats in the 21st century are something like rewriting textbooks, rewriting history, then increase in vigilantism, moral policing, vote bank politics, and polarization of communities, then biased judiciary, media which is run by crony capitalists supporting the government and its what do you say ulterior motives, attacks on rationalists and even eliminating them, misuse of social media, infiltration of community elements and into top leadership positions. These are some of the threats and dangers I find to secularism in recent times. And I think we can discuss these points as we proceed. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
Ravi, anything?
Yeah, I've just made my opening remarks.
Yeah. So with that, let us also listen to Professor Albert Joseph Smith and then maybe have a discussion. Yeah. Dr. Smith?
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, yes. You're audible.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for the nice introduction, a very peculiar kind of an introduction that has been given. And I'm being asked to speak on the challenges to secularism in India on the 21st century and my own perspective. And I'd like to take a lead from where you left in your introduction. I'm also very fond of history. So I'd like to begin with the legacy of the use of the term secularism itself. Though secularism is of recent origin, this term has come into being recently, but there have been these interpretation, expressions of secularism right since ancient times. We have found the expression or the interpretation of secularism way back, as you spoke about Emperor Ashoka. In many of his edicts that is found, and in one of his edicts, he talks about, in his decrees, he says that all sects should be duly honored in every way on all occasions. They all deserve reverence for one reason or another. So beautifully put, beginning from Ashoka. Then I go down to Swami Vivekananda, and I take a lead from take an extract from what he spoke at the Chicago in All Religious Conference in 1893, where he said, Indian tradition is not just about toleration, but an acceptance of all religion as true. Hinduism is incomplete without other religions. He also said, anybody dreams of the exclusive survival of his own religion and the destruction of others, I pity him from the bottom of my heart and point out to him that upon the banner of every religion, soon will be written, in spite of resistance, help and not fight. Assimilation and not indoctrination. Harmony and not destruction. Harmony and peace and not dissension. This is what Swami Vivekananda put. We have beautiful people who are given expressions of secularism to us in ancient times. I come back to what you spoke about Emperor Akbar. As I said, I also love history. So Akbar made official pronouncements on religious tolerance, his own religion, Deen-e-Ilahi. In 1590, he arranged systematic religious dialogues between all religions. He said no man should be interfered with on account of his religion. Taking note of religious diversity, he asked the state, the administration, to maintain equidistance from all religions. The leaders, so this is what happened in the medieval times. So I come now to the freedom struggle movement. Even during the freedom struggle movement, many of our leaders earnestly believed in the politics of pluralism, notwithstanding all too frequent postulates of Hindu sectarian, supremacistic, hegemonic intentions. They believed in the politics of pluralism. Now I want to also specifically mention what was discussed in the Constituent Assembly. In the Constituent Assembly was the main platform for discussing all these issues. In the Constituent Assembly, there was a detailed discussion on the nature of the state of India itself. And when the discussion began, they kept in mind the multicultural, multilingual background of India. And on November 15, 1948, in the Constituent Assembly, there was a debate on the nature of the Indian state. And there were many interventions made. And the intervention was about the use of this term called secular. Because even these days, people misuse and abuse this term. And when they took up this term called secular, the question was whether there is ambiguity or there is acceptability. And I want to quote few lines from some of the members of the Constituent Assembly, beginning with Loknath Mishra, who he said, in his own interpretation of what secularism, I thought that a secular state of partitioned India was to have to show maximum generosity of, or I thought that a secular state of partitioned India was maximum generosity of Hindus towards its non-Hindu population. Or he said, I thought that secular state of partition India was of maximum generosity of Hindu territory for its non-Hindu population. Likewise, I also want to quote the Vice President of the Constituent Assembly, H.C. Mukherjee. He said, if your idea is to have a secular state, it follows inevitably that we cannot afford to recognize minorities based on religion. Said we cannot recognize minorities based on religion. Then comes in Nehru and Ambedkar, who played a very important role. Jawaharlal Nehru and Ambedkar. Many question why they both did not include this term secularism in the constitution then. Why was it introduced in 1976 in the 42nd constitutional amendment when there was a political turmoil and upheaval during that particular time? A lot of debates, a lot of questions have been risen now. Nehru also said, none of us can say in his heart of hearts that he has no prejudice and no taint of communalism in his mind or his heart. None of us can say in his heart or hearts of heart that he has no prejudice and no taint of communalism in his mind or heart. However, having said this, the Constituent Assembly, they debated, and very conveniently, Ambedkar was very wise at that particular time. I appreciate the wisdom of the man. Many issues, even when he took up the issue of Uniform Civil Code, he conveniently left it to the legislature, the parliament to decide. Even this term, he said, let's not dwell, let's not discuss about it. But however, the Constituent Assembly drew consensus on no discrimination on the grounds of religion. There shall be no discrimination on the grounds of religion. No religion will receive patronage, whatever. No citizen in the country will have preferential treatment or will be discriminated simply on the grounds of faith or religion. This consensus was written, and then we have the constitutional obligations, which I also want to mention, which I heard over all the sessions that we spoke, from Article 14, Article 16, Article 25 to 30, Article 44, and Article 51 of the Indian Constitution. So this is just an introduction, what I just wanted to speak about, what secularism. Now, coming up to what are the challenges, what are the threats, what are the impediments that we have, or impediments or the challenges to the prospect of secularism in India that has come to the center stage, has come to the mainstream. Now, to begin with, the very term secularism, secular itself has an issue. This very term itself. There is, as I said, there's a debate about debate on the ambiguity and acceptability of it in itself. There are constant debates that are taking on. Many of them have used this term in a very fraudulent way, especially the political class that has used this. Some of them say it is an imported term. into India. Some of them say we are aping the American form of secularism. Some of them also state, especially some famous scholars. Yesterday, I heard a lot being spoken about Rajiv Bhargav. I like what he has said about secularism. He says either no religion or either all religions. Okay? That's what he meant. What secularism is. I think because even Constitution doesn't have a proper definition of what the actual meaning of the term secularism in itself is, and that's why this huge hue and cry about it. And there have been many intellectuals, many scholars, many people like Professor Ravi Richard also said now we have the media that is taken is responsible for it. We have civil society people who are responsible. We have the judiciary is responsible. Many of them are responsible. The minorities, the majorities are also responsible for putting us in such a complete clumsy state of what the entire term of secularism in itself is. Okay, so this term of secularism itself has an issue. Okay, and some of them say we were already a secular state. That's why Ambedkar did not want to include it. Some of them, when we were already secular, why was it incorporated in 1976 uh, in the nature of India as a state? These issues are, this itself is a big threat to us. Secondly, the politics of opportunism, and which has undermined the secular values of India itself. Okay. Political parties in India have used religion and the caste factors to promote their own political interest. And doing so, they have also, in a way, brought about appeasement politics, appeasement of different religious communities, and they have distorted the very fabric of constitutional and democratic values. So somewhere in the name of secularism, in the name of appeasing certain communities because they were deprived, because they were denied certain liberties and privileges, they have come about distorting the constitutional and democratic principles and values in itself. So this is the second impediment threat that I have found. The third is I also, lots has been spoken about the post-Nehru era about secularism. Nehru for surely was very secular. But then the leaders of the post-Nehru secular era also have to be blamed, have to take responsibility for it because they have never promoted the true value and true essence meaning of secularism itself. Maybe they have thought that they were more neo-traditionally oriented. Perhaps they lacked the real commitment towards the secularization of society. And they also, somewhere I felt they failed in evolving, like what Sir Ravi Richard also said, and what you also said, sir, about evolving a scientific temper among people and giving them a non-religious outlook, giving us a society of a non-religious outlook. This, in a way, I think the leaders capitalized on this term called secular to just uh, try and foster and promote their own agenda. So this is said to be this third important factor. Failure on the part of the leaders in India during post-Nehru era. Maybe somewhere people hold Indira Gandhi responsible for it. Okay, and then also she gave the lead in a way. It was a kind of a blessing in disguise for the people who came after her, especially the Sangh Parivar groups. Then another important threat or challenge to uh, India's secularism in the present context is the growing sense of communalism that is there in this very strong passion and extreme passion and love for one's community and showing extreme hatred and antagonism to other communities is also said to be another important factor where they are nurturing. Everything is looked at and from a secular or a communal angle. Despite the election commission having even banned communal electorates, which the British tried to introduce to Article to the 1919 Act of Montego-Chelmsford or 1909 Act. Okay, and also which they also the election commission also have banned the use of religion for soliciting votes. Okay. Uh, all these have been introduced, but still the communal factor plays a very important role for political parties, political classes to come to power. Again, as I said, it is the majority and the minority are to be blamed because they have also been a part of this entire process of non-secularizing or not secularizing our society. And this feeling of communalism, as long as it is not shunned out, as long as we do not leave it out, secularism cannot take place or cannot sow its roots strongly in the Indian soil, and we have seen how they are trying to dilute the whole secular fabric with, bringing in the Uniform Civil Code, bringing in the anti-conversion bill, okay, the appeasement politics that they play. Moreover, the intimidation, the different forms of intimidation that are there on the minorities that they bring about. So this is another important threat that I have seen. And another important threat or impediment is also threat to cultural, ethnic, and religious pluralism in India. And especially, uh, we have seen this being manifested in several ways, how the cultural, ethnic, and religious pluralism has been threatened in India. The freedom to practice one religion, one culture, one's rituals, food habits, marriage, or secular idols is sought to be annulled. They put an end to it by certain, or they're trying to put an end to it by some organized fringe groups who claim and hold them, or claim to be the key holders, or what we call chabi masters, as what is right and what is moral. And they claim themselves also to be arbiters. Okay, people like Mutalik and all, they claim themselves to be, torch bearers of Hindu culture. Okay, arbiters of neutrality. This is how they claim. This is also said to be another important factor that has led up to secularism being a major important threat, or it has come as a main challenge to the present day prospects and times. Then also there is one thing that I also noticed these days in present times. There is the use of cultural and religious symbols and allegories, which they have, in a way, uh, try to diffuse and try to suppress anyone having a secular mindset. This use of cultural and religious symbols and allegories, which I often see, everywhere it is happening. Off late, and there's very strong attempt has been made to use symbols of all kinds and to negotiate and kind to ritualize people's life. They're trying to regiment people's life. And so I want to quote one British psychologist called Tom Chetwynd, who in the early 90s brought out a work called Dictionary of Symbols, in which he says differences in religion arises from differences in symbolism or allegories, which is very much true in our present times. So differences in religion arises from differences in symbolism or allegories, which is very much true in our times. And if you see in present times, symbols are being used in different forms. Of late, you saw the symbol of black and symbol of saffron, some the multicolored symbols to define different religious denomination and religious differences. Or there is colors of resistance being offered now. Colors of resistance being offered. Maybe they're reinventing our freedom movement of non-cooperation, civil disobedience movement and all. Okay. So for instance, the symbols of resistance during the freedom movement was, the symbol of Gandhi's cap, or we call it Nehru's cap, or khadi cloth, or the charaka, also known as symbols of resistance and self-reliance. In recent, the use of, of late, the Nehru jacket, nowadays called the Modi designer jackets, or the designer Modi jackets, symbolizing, a kind of a support, or so kind of a solidarity with the present establishment that is given. So these perhaps these symbols of intra-faith or interfaith or intra-sect, or whatever we call it, is perhaps a very serious threat and a serious peril to our whole fabric. Forget about secularism, our democratic fabric itself. Somewhere I was reflecting, I was thinking, see, there are many rituals, many ceremonies like the Bhumi Puja. All of us do it. Bhumi Puja, breaking of coconuts on inaugural or auspicious occasions, performing of the Arati and applying of tilak or the Vibhuti to distinguish gurus, or perceived by that are perceived by Hindus who saying to be that these are our cultural and our nationalistic expressions, which also in a way tries and dilutes our very essence of our secular fabric. Somewhere we are becoming a theocratic state where slowly a state like Uttar Pradesh is turning out to be. Okay, so that's where, and these kind of practices are performed by all sects and denominations and all religious groups. Okay? So however, all these practices, some of them perceive and believe to be manifestations of Hindu culture. For the rest, it is, they say that this is an expression of cultural or nationalistic feeling. But for others, they say, no, this is a manifestation of your own culture, your own extreme culturalism. That is it. Okay, so, but however, these practices are also being performed at state functions. That is a problem for us. These are performed at state functions. And this creates unnecessary misgivings about the neutrality of the state itself. Okay? So this I found to be one of the serious threats and challenges to the secular and the democratic and the constitutional values of India itself. Another important aspect that I want to mention, which is a major threat, which I also find is, the perception of the minorities. The perception of the minority. Different members of the Constitutional Assembly years back have said different things. But here, there has been a sizable section of the Indian society equating many practices or many symbols with national culture, or they are referring it with nationalism. Okay, so there is expression of there is this very strong feeling among the minorities that there is a strong rise of religious fundamentalism. On the other hand, the majority also feel that there is religious fundamentalism amongst the minorities. But however, this kind of a reaction, a response to religious fundamentalism, many of us now perceive it as a Hindu backlash. We refer it and understand it as Hindu backlash. Okay? Whatever may be the justification or explanation, but nothing could be condoned, because there has been serious lapses on the part of the state in trying to handle this backlash, especially among the minorities. There is a strong sense of insecurity. During communal rights, they look at the state and the law enforcers and the state machinery, the way they handle the communal rights, the way they discriminate and impartially treat the people who belong to the minority community. Most of the times, these communal rights are handled in a very non-secular way. So there is a great sense of fear amongst the minority against, or there is a great sense of fear in the minority against the giant majority, okay, which has a brute strength to overpower and divest perhaps the distinct characteristics of certain minority groups in itself. Then lastly, I also want to mention about one of the major threats is about Hindu nationalism itself. There is certain groups of people who claim themselves to be Hindu nationalist. Okay. They differ with the secular idols that are there in India. As I said, they call it fraudulent foreign import perpetrated by elites associated with certain other political classes. And the proponents of this Hindu nationalism believe that Hinduism is not the uncertain balancing of ethnic and religious communities residing in India. There is no balancing, no acceptance of other religious and ethnic communities in India. This for them is the ultimate principle. This is the ultimate source of what their identity is, their country in itself. This has come to the forefront. We have seen it happening, and it continues to happen. And this has, in a way, has jeopardized and been a great impediment to the prospects of secularism in India. Having said this, I also want to mention few ways how we could look forward in terms of trying to address or trying to carry forward the whole concept of secularism. I also strongly believe there should be secularization of Indian society. The state should dissociate and distance itself from spiritual and religious uh, ceremonies, or distance itself from all religious practices, and instead begin to focus on secularism as a response to deep religious diversity. So the state should now begin to focus as a response to deep religious diversity, as I quoted Rajiv Bhargav said, either no religion or all religion. So there should be a great sense of distancing of religious practices and idols of any form, whether it be spiritual or religious in nature or courses in nature. Secondly, I also think one of the way forward is the future of our nation largely depends on approach towards the minority. I think the true test of democracy is in protecting our minorities and the protection of minority rights. And everyone should have a voice and a right to be heard. Any attempt to silence the voice of the minority or even silence the voice of the majority will act against the very principles of democracy and also the values of secularism in itself. Okay. And thirdly, I think also there has to be one of the way forward is respect and acceptance of multiplicity of culture that we have in India: language, religion, caste, beliefs. Okay. This is very distinct, and these distinct pluralistic features is not just something that is unique for us. It is also it's a very proud heritage. I think we have to value that. We have to preserve. We have to protect it, and it's a responsibility of everyone. Fourthly, also, I think time and again people have spoken about this. They've spoken about pluralism and inclusiveness. This should not just be discussed, perhaps in boardrooms or platforms where we have conferences and discussions. This should be entangled in the administration and the policy making, in power relations. Thereby, we, in a way, accept diversity to be a part of our day-to-day administration. And lastly, one of the way forwards that I want to also mention is that all of us, we are here discussing about secularism and the threats and challenges of secularism. I think we should take a pledge that we should offer our resistance. We should censure and resist any form of institutionalization of religious domination. In India, we should resist and we should censure any form of institutionalization of religious domination and practice. Okay? And we should not permit any unnecessary regimentation on pluralistic practices. No one can regulate any kind of a pluralistic practice. And this directly I'm mentioning in stating it and addressing it to the administration and the present governments and regiments that we have. So we, being participants and being members who are here organizing, I think we should take a pledge and say we would censure and offer resistance to any institutionalization of religious domination and practice in India. At the same time, any unnecessary regimentation of pluralistic practices. So with this, these are my views and opinions. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for your wonderful disposition and again referring the name of Jawaharlal Nehru, who's the most hated man of the Sangh Parivar and all the other right-wing activists. But conveniently, they tend to forget that Motilal Nehru and Jawaharlal Nehru were also the people who sowed the seeds of modern secular ideas in India. And you very beautifully also spoke on the issues of majority and minority. So here, the problem I perceive is the right wing has very successfully implanted the whole idea of the majoritarian community starting to feel like the minorities. So that has really become a problem here. And this idea has been bought and purchased by the people belonging to the majoritarian community, wherein they feel that in India we may be a majority, but around the world, if you see, we are a minority. So they are pushed into that kind of shell, and people have very gladly accepted this kind of discourse. So apart from that, you also very beautifully, Professor Ravi also spoke on the Babri Masjid incident. So that Babri Masjid incident sowed the communal seeds in this beautiful country, from which we are yet to really come out from the ghosts of 1992, and before that, the ghosts of 1984, where one particular community the Sikhs were targeted, and then we see riots happening and genocide being committed on the Sikh community in the national capital, went unanswered by the Congress regime and the later regimes also. Here, everybody need to share the blame as politicians. Moreover, you also touched upon the all-important issue of how education can really change and what is the function of the state. So that is something which I like. The function of the state, is it to govern, or is it to plant a communal divide among the people? So when we look at our own state, Karnataka is one of the most progressive states of India. So way back in the early 2000s, we had more than 8,000 firms operating from Karnataka, where they had their headquarters here. So Karnataka nearly accounts for 38% of exports of India, and we are all said and done the Silicon Valley of India. We are the leading state of the nation in terms of biotechnology exports. That apart, we also account for 75% of floriculture that happens in the entire country. And floriculture industry is a never expanding industry. And that apart, Karnataka is also the home of 7 leading banks of India, including the Canara Bank, Syndicate Bank, Corporation Bank, Vijaya Bank, Karnataka Bank, Vaishya Bank, and the erstwhile State Bank of Mysore, which is now part of the State Bank of India. And most of these banks, interestingly, were started in the coastal districts of Udupi and Mangalore. Today, these two are the communal, unfortunately, these two states, these two districts considered as the most progressive, two of the most progressive districts of Karnataka, are in the forefront of what we call as saffron politics, where the issue of hijab and love jihad has really peaked. And then instead of we speaking on development during the present regime's previous innings, way back in 2008, we see a very funny thing wherein you spoke of state functions. So they completely forgot about their state functions, and I still remember vividly that the Karnataka government allotted 130 crores for temples and mutts in the state to please gods, to provide more rain, and in turn the rains would enhance food production in the state, because the then chief minister believed that the gods were angry with the previous governments. His argument of providing 130 crores to the temples and mutts in order to please the gods for more rains was that the previous governments had made them angry because the previous governments were secular. So that was a way these people intervened. And then these people have unleashed terrorism into the minds of the young students by not allowing them to wear a dress of their choice, by beef ban. See, today what I eat is my problem. I pay for what I eat. I live in a secular state. I live in a country where the constitution protects my rights. As a citizen of India, I am proud, and at the same time, I have a choice to make. And these are my own personal choices. So when I speak of my personal choices, I should decide what I wear, what I eat, with whom I mingle, with who's my friend, with whom I go about, what I do. All these are my personal problems. The state should never uh, intervene. So it is in that way that this communal hatred is implanted by the governments in our country. For example, you giving one more example of how state intervention has happened. We also see that Karnataka government had imported 50,000 liters of holy water from Ganga, or they called it as Ganga Jal, to be distributed, and they said that this is the Tirtha for the people from the Ganges, and they also distributed 6 lakh calendars of Lord Shiva. And then today Shivaratri has become a kind of a state festival. Ganesha Chaturthi has again become a state festival. This time we also saw most of the festivals, including Vaikunta Ekadashi, where sweets were distributed. You know, everywhere we find that the state's involvement in celebration of religious festivals are on the rise, which is something very very sad and a very bad precedent. And at the same time, we also see secular places like Baba Budangiri, which had remained a secular place wherein it's a Sufi shrine, being made a communal place, and where both the communities are fighting against each other to take the upper hand as to whom this place belongs to, and they want to cleanse the whole place because of the Sufi heritage and enforce Hindu rights and rituals there. And it's also a shame that world over Karnataka is being spoken as a state where attacks on temples, sorry, attacks on the churches have rampantly increased over the years. So, as you rightly pointed out, the Sri Ram Sena, Pramod Mutalik, they even go to the extent of even stopping girls from celebrating Valentine's Day and entering into pubs. So these are private spaces. Whether a girl goes to a pub or wherever she goes, it is her personal choice. It is for the parents to keep track of the children and what they do. It is not for the private people, the so-called moral policies of our society. So we don't need moral policing by right-wing groups. So in that way, who goes to a pub? And then pubs are not meant only for men. The constitution never says that pubs are meant for men, bars are meant for men, theaters are meant for men, and only men can celebrate Valentine's Day. No, we are a long way away. But it is these very same people, when they go abroad, they become all the more liberal. So this shows our dichotomous positions. When we are here, we have a certain norm to be followed. But the minute we get out of our safe zones, we want foreign exchange, we want foreign money. When we get out, we want to have all the niceties of the world, and we want to pump in the money which we have earned into these kind of communal projects. So in that way, these are certain things which are problematic, especially for the younger generations. And I find that Professor Ravi has raised his hand. Yeah, maybe before continuing with my discourse, let me ask Professor Ravi to continue. Yes, Ravi sir.
Dr. Paul, I think we have discussed this problem or this kind of a danger not only to secularism but for democracy itself. It's a clear and present danger. It's very deep rooted. I think we have very few minutes left. We need to at least discuss what needs to be done, since it's already happened. It's very deep rooted, and it's actually becoming more monstrous in proportion. So I feel that we need to discuss what needs to be done as educationists. What is the response? At least from my side, I feel that there are a lot of interferences which have happened in the education system on campuses, particularly. A lot of communalization of campuses have happened, colleges, universities, and it so happened even in our schools and PUC colleges with the hijab controversy which has happened here. I think as educators, I think we need to educate the younger generation about all these developments. We should have maybe more proactive approaches, maybe conducting workshops for students, especially from high school level onwards, on constitutional rights, making them aware about how these kind of developments, especially the growing Hindu nationalism, what kind of threats it poses for the future, especially for the poor and the marginalized. Then also about crony capitalism and how we are deviating from core economic issues into issues which are century old back. All these religious kind of patronage has been there from the time of kings. supporting religion and all that. I think we need to be more focused on developing society, because when you look at the Human Development Index, we are lagging behind on many parameters. So there are lots of issues which have to be taken up, and the governments are using religion as a way of distracting from the core issues. I think as educationists, we have to treat this growing fundamentalism as a threat to democracy. And I feel, as Dr. Smith has pointed out, the word secular is more ambiguous and it's acceptatory. I don't know whether it's going to be there, whether we were secular in the true sense, that is itself is something which we have to question, because in the last 40 years, what I've observed is that all political parties have used religion, or rather misused religion for their own gains. In different forms, it has happened. One party which was there earlier in power was trying to appease a certain minority for the sake of polarizing and getting votes. Now we have a different approach being followed, and this is becoming a very dangerous kind of a precedent. And I feel the response from this could be from the education system, and we need to take more proactive approaches. Otherwise, it will become like armchair kind of discussions. It ends up there. So that is my point of view.
Thank you, Ravi. Before the concluding remarks, I think Ms. Chandni can take up some questions for the panelists. Ms. Chandni?
Yes. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah,
I
good
request all the participants to leave their questions in the chat box or raise your hand to ask your questions.
There is one question.
So there's a comment by Nidhi Katti. It says Vijayanagara dynasty of Karnataka too had a secular outlook.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, maybe I can, being a historian, maybe I can answer this rather than giving the question to the panelists to answer. See, the Vijayanagara state never proclaimed itself to be a secular state at all. It was formed by a Muni. All said and done, it was a state that was formed by a Muni, and then we find that they patronized one particular group. They never patronized. Buddhism was a religion that was there. You don't see Buddhist monasteries coming up during the Vijayanagara period. You don't see Shaivite temples coming around their period. They were Vaishnavites, and at the same time, if you see, they frequently fought with the Bahmani sultans. So in that way, they had a state religion. So when we speak of a secular state, a state should never have its own religion. So for that matter, I would say that the Wadayars were far more secular because they gave land grants to the Muslims, they gave land grants to the Christians. A number of Christian missionary schools were encouraged by them in the erstwhile state of Mysore. So in that way, they were far more liberal when it came to the question of religion rather than the Vijayanagara period or the previous period of the Hoysalas. Yes. Yes, Chandni.
Thank you, Paul, sir. I do not see any more questions or raised hands. As of
I
now,
think there was one comment.
There's a comment by Sudhakara, MC Sudhakar, sir. It's for Ravi, sir. What we have to do is good, is the comment. Ravi Richard, sir, is right.
Yeah. So I think we are on time. We have exceeded by just 2 minutes, and then just to conclude, I thank both the panelists for having given their perspectives and then coming out with some solutions. Also, yeah, Ravi sir rightly spoke about how we need to have different sort of orientation to enlighten the young minds. I totally agree. On there is question communal from household, because from the house itself kids are taught to hate a particular community. So this is where education can really see. First you need to identify which community does that. Because, for example, the same person who has asked this question spoke of Vijayanagara Empire. Yeah, we say in India, Vijayanagara Empire upheld Sanatana Dharma. Vijayanagara Empire gave importance to the fourfold Varnashrama system. So in that way, in India, if communal problem has to be sorted out, we need to first sort of the caste problem also. Caste and communal problem go hand in hand. So in that way, Kuompu had proposed universal mass marriages. So here in India, marrying a person from another caste is a problem. We always see just last couple of days back, we have seen how in Hunsur how caste Hindu killed his own daughter for falling in love with a Dalit boy. you know. So as long as these sort of problems are there, honor killings go on unabated. So we need to set our house in order first. So in that way, education is the only tool to change the minds of young people. No amount of religious teachings in the textbooks praising particular religions is going to change. So we need to have a sort of a value system based on experiential learning. Everybody should be able to accept the other person as they are. So when that state of mind is pushed into the young minds of our children, when young children from all schools are able to walk into a Dalit Keri, the dwellings of the Dalits, have meals, sleep with them, only then the producers will go. Unless these kind of things happen, we will have our own biases. As long as these biases are there in the young minds would keep nurturing the same biases, and that leads to the outbreak of communalism. So that is where education can make a difference. And as most of us here are educationists, kindly let us come out of the shell of whatever we are. Let us leave religion to our own doors, behind the doors. The minute let us teach our children that the minute I step out of my home, I become a public person. I am no more a Christian, Hindu, or Muslim. The minute I step out, I become an Indian. So that is the only way I think the future should look up to. So this is what I would propose. So I thank the organizers for having given all the three of us an opportunity to present our views. I would thank both Professor Ravi and Dr. Albert Smith for putting across their views in such a beautiful manner, very, very illicitly explaining the small nuances of what our generation is undergoing and how the future generations can overcome this problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Newman, for not just effectively moderating this panel discussion, but also sharing your insights on the challenges to secularism we face today and the possible solutions that we can extend. I also extend sincere gratitude to the two panel discussants, Professor Ravi Richard and Dr. Albert Joseph Smith, for sharing their insights on various threats to secularism today.
Good evening, everyone. I hope this 2 days national conference filled with very stimulating and engaging dialogues has helped us to reflect upon the challenges faced by secularism in India, which in itself is very complex and exhaustive to decipher. I also strongly feel that this conference has helped us to ponder upon the theory, practice, and development of secularism and its relevance to the modern India. I'm sure it also has dealt with the problems of understanding secularism in today's India, where bigotry has become quite normal. So I mean, the way secularism is abused now is a serious concern that could and would destroy the syncretic culture we have inherited from our past. So this conference wouldn't have happened without the help and cooperation of many people. So firstly, I thank ICSSR, Indian Council of Social Science Research, for sponsoring this 2 days conference on a very significant topic. And I also thank Reverend Father Reverend Father Brian Pereira SJ and Dr. Paul Newman, Principal St. Joseph's Evening College, for for helping us to put this conference. I thank my heartfelt thanks goes to speakers, 2 day speakers, starting from Dr. Jeevan Kumar, Dr. Shashidhar, Dr. Ashwath Narayan, Reverend Father Cedric Prakash SJ, and Dr. Madhavan KS. And I also extend my gratitude to all the participants, paper presenters, students, researchers, um, panelists for making this conference an intellectually engaging. And I also extend my gratitude to the reporters, the organizers, the coordinators, and each everyone from teaching and non teaching staff, technical team. So with this, let me conclude my vote of thanks, and I wish each one of you a very happy evening. Thank you.